This is a Dancing Stickman production.
When I think about all of these systems in the real world and people protesting, rioting, what have you, that a lot of the world systems that we see can also be viewed as games. And that's the thing that I love about working in games, because the things that I think people believe, which I do think are radical at the time, they feel a little less radical when they are in a game context.
Hello, and welcome back to Worldsbuilder, a podcast about the business of creativity. I am your host, Sarah Brink. Today, I am delighted to bring you this interview with Ashlyn Sparrow, who you may know as Naya in Oops All Witches. Ash was also the co-director for Broken Sky, the alternate reality game I ran over the summer of 2025. I invited her into that role because she is actually a prolific game designer. Ash is a senior research associate at the Weston Game Lab at the University of Chicago, which is housed in their Media Art, Data, and Design Center, which is honestly one of the coolest maker spaces I have ever been in. They have their game room right next to the lab where they do the 3D printing, and on the other side of that is where the software engineers are, and they have all of the cinema people in there as well, so it's a hub for all of these students to experiment at creating different kinds of media. And it turns out, I didn't even realize this, that she co-founded the Weston Game Lab. So I asked Ash to speak with me about her road less traveled in the games industry and to talk about her philosophy of game design and how it kind of applies to life. Let's get to it. Ashlyn Sparrow, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Yeah. So I think it might be worthwhile to tell the audience how you and I know each other, since I think it's fair to say at this point that we are buddies. And
Oh, absolutely.
at the time that this podcast comes out, it will be after Oops All Witches is aired. So if anybody's coming to you through listening to that, they're going to know you as Naya first. But actually, it turns out that you're like a world-renowned academic and you study game design.
Yo.
No, literally, that's what I tell people, because like the reason I know you is because I am building an alternate reality game. And I was like, how do you do this?
And what was funny is when you reached out, I was like, wait, someone outside of a university knows what an alternate reality game is? That's crazy.
A university or a marketing team.
Right. I'm like, I must respond to this person's email. That's crazy.
So I've also been like doing research on alternate reality games, and I picked up that book, Alternate Reality Games on the Cusp of Digital Gameplay, or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And this is after you and I had talked for the first time. And I turned to the first chapter, and who has co-authored it?
Oh my gosh.
Ashlyn Sparrow. And I was like, oh, I know her.
Little old me. Me and my little ARG buddies at U Chicago, just being little nerds, being like, have you considered using games as these digital tools that can help people think through larger scale problems?
Well, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Let's start at the beginning. This is a question I think I will be asking everybody in this podcast. Can you walk me through your work experience and history, and how did you end up, as you described it to me literally yesterday, as a maker, but in academia?
It's a wild ride, I'm going to be honest, and never a pathway that I thought I would be on, but I would also say I never thought it was possible. So it's interesting to now be here in a possibility that has just opened up. So I always like to start off with the fact that I have always been like the hardcore gamer anime kid. Everyone has one of those in their like classroom when they're like 12. That was me. I would like to believe, though, I was not super annoying. I like to believe I was really chill about it, and I was the kid. And so my sister was the same way, where it's like, oh, I'm reading a manga, and you come over and you ask me what the manga is. I would happily tell you what it is, and I would even let you like borrow the book, right? Like, because I want more people to play games and talk about anime. And so, my dad built computers all the time at home, and I was like, that's super cool. I want to be just like my dad. And so it's one of the reasons why, I went off and did IT work, because my dad was primarily doing IT and logistics in the military for 20 years. And I was like, yeah, cool. I'm going to do that as well. I went and got my master's at Carnegie Mellon University, focusing on entertainment technology. Again, I was really interested in this concept of, well, what would it look like to one, make games, but make games in a slightly different context. I grew up loving educational games. I loved Oregon Trail. I loved Jumpstart Second Grade. I loved all these games that just combined education and learning.
Carmen Sandiego.
Carmen Sandiego, do not get me started. I learned so much about the world because of her.
Right.
I was like, girl, I don't know why we're coming after you, but you should keep running away because I'm gonna learn more about this.
Take me to all these places, Carmen.
Right, like Lithuania. Why are you so small? Right. And so while at Carnegie Mellon, I was doing a lot of group projects, learning about teamwork and learning about how to make a game for the first time. And so it was this moment, like after I graduated from my master's, it's the kind of classic, you just graduated, what do you do with your life sort of scenario. The classic, I don't know, this is my case, 6 to 8 months after you graduate, you got to find a job. You can't find a job. That was me. And I had two pathways. So this is like two different kind of timelines. The first one was I went and actually applied at the NSA, the National Security Agency, went through the whole process, actually got a job offer, was going to work at the NSA and do cybersecurity and make educational games. The other one was a weird little lab, a new lab that I heard in 2013 called the Game Chicago Design Lab, started by a medical professor, a medical doc, like a trained medical doctor. Like she literally has clinic every other day, would actually perform surgeries and then come into a meeting talking about grants, and an English professor. And I interviewed with him and I was like, that's so weird. Like you two can't possibly work together and you two can't possibly make games together. I'm going to choose that path because the NSA will theoretically, according to my dad, which he's right, will still be there. And then this lab that's going after grant funding might not. Let me choose the weirder choice. And so I chose the weirder choice. And so that meant that I made educational games. I worked on, grant funded projects. I worked with high school teens. That job then led me because I eventually started to run that game lab. And that leadership opportunity led me to then opening up a new game space, the Weston Game Lab.
Wait, you opened the Weston Game Lab?
Yeah, in 2019.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So me
Cool.
and my colleague Kent Lambert and I worked with a number of faculty here to open up the Weston Game Lab, which is part of the Media Arts Data and Design Center.
Dope.
And so we're the reason why it looks the way that it does, the way that it's operating the way that it does. And because of my experiences at Game Changer, I was given the, opportunity to actually open up another game lab that is student facing and more community facing.
Cool.
And I did that for about 5 to 6 years to then transition to the new weird role that I have, which is a senior research associate, which is a fancy way to say I can make and design my own games. And me designing and making games is the way that I continue to renew my contract in the same way that like when tenure track faculty, when they go through that tenure process, once they get tenure, then they can do whatever they want. I don't really have that aspect, but every 3 years, people will review my games and then they'll say, hey, we like what you did. Continue working with us. Or actually, we hate what you did. Leave. I don't think that last part is going to happen, but it's possible.
That's really interesting to me because I actually didn't realize that you were thinking about going into information security because I've been looking at your CV.
Absolutely.
And I know that you do things like programming and prototyping and wireframing and stuff like that. Was there ever like I want to make video games sort of thing, or was it always making the weirder choice?
Absolutely. I've always wanted to go and work in the kind of AAA industry space. That was really where my trajectory was. But I also noticed something about myself and my own particular tastes about the games that I grew up like loving. They are the games that were, I think, super popular at the time. Like I really loved Japanese role-playing games. I really loved computer role-playing games growing up. And I'd say that I grew up in like the early 2000s where games were just kind of like weird in terms of like their aesthetics, in terms of their sounds. And so I tend to like weirder game experiences. And the older that I got, the more I realized that I don't know, sometimes I feel like the games in the game industry are just not weird enough. And so I just wanted an opportunity to see what it would be like to actually work on games that focus on different forms, right? Like, this is why I'm drawn to alternate reality games. I'm drawn to really like story games, theater games. I do love a video game, and I love video games that do weirder things. Like, one of my favorite games is Death Stranding, just by virtue of Kojima doing something that you would never really think about doing in a game, or actually taking the thing that you do all the time in a game to its logical conclusion and actually being the only walking simulator to have ever actually come out of the game industry. Right? Like, people use walking sim as like a derogatory term about games that you only walk. And I'm like, well, Death Stranding, you actually walk. You are literally walking and you can trip over things, right? And that's very exciting to me.
Then, okay, this is a really broad question. I'm sorry, but I would love it if you tell us, the audience, a little bit about the kinds of games that you make. So I'm thinking of things like Seed,
Yeah.
Bystander, Hexacago, Hearsay, Terrarium, A Labyrinth, Echo. And just so the audience knows, I have just mentioned card games, board games, video games, and alternate reality games. So you really
Mhm.
run the gamut in terms of what you're making. So can you talk about your principles behind your use of game design and interaction design to facilitate learning?
So I think for me, when I think about game design and what it really is, I mean, of course, we were like, you're designing games for people. What are games? Games are these rule based systems that are about artificial conflict, which are all true. But I also think about the fact that a game doesn't have to just be one thing, right? A game doesn't have to be a video game. It doesn't have to just be card or board game. I think about game design more broadly, where what you're really doing is interacting with the materiality, the material conditions of your world, and you're manipulating that and putting rules on top of that, and then you are creating a game. All games are artificial, but it means that if you understand the materiality of your world, you can then make a game from that. And so, if you're making a video game, that means you have to understand the materials that go into making a video game. It means you have to understand a computer. It means you have to understand art and sound and how that all works together. And also the ways that people can interpret what you put in front of them. And so, this is one reason why I like working at a university, because this framework makes a lot of sense for me, but it also makes a lot of sense for the people I work with. And sometimes, depending on the game designer you talk to, it does make a lot of sense, or sometimes it might be a little too weird, too far fetched, too like high level for folks, right? But it then means that, well, the other kind of philosophy that I have is that learning is inherently fun, and it is also like all games teach you something, right? Now, what you learn might not be 100% applicable to the real world, but you do learn something, right? The example I always give is there are now 1,000 plus Pokemon. Back in my day, there was only 150. But like I used to know all 150 Pokemon. There are so many people who know all 1,000 Pokemon, where to get them, all their powers, their evolutions, how they interact. Chemistry has a bunch of elements, and you could know where to get them from, how they interact, and all these other things. You could do that, right? And so people have they enjoy the process of learning. It's really about how you teach a person to learn.
Yeah, what do you think makes games so conducive to learning?
The fact that you can you can fail in a safe way, and you can try again, and the most the computer is going to say to you is you died, and restart and put you at a checkpoint, right? As opposed to, if you fail a test in school, you're going to have to do it again and deal with the social consequences of that, which might have a larger weight. It would be quote unquote more serious. And I think that's the beauty of games. Games are also really good at like scaffolding information.
Yeah. One of my questions in here was actually like, why don't we, for the audience, could you just tell us what the magic circle is in game design?
Oh, the magic circle.
We love.
The phrase that is also kind of the bane of my existence. So the magic circle is this concept coming from Huizinga. He was a medieval historian, cultural historian, who came up with the book Homo Ludens, thinking about what it means to be a person who plays, that all culture and civilization comes in as play and expands through play. So the magic circle is this idea that When you play a game, you step into this magic circle where all these possibilities are happening, right? The rules of a game only make sense when you're in that magic circle. Once you are no longer playing the game, that's you stepping out of that magic circle, right? And so it creates this kind of barrier for all these things to happen where things that would affect you in the real world change, right? A really good literal example is a boxing ring. In a boxing ring, it is totally okay to punch people in the face. Outside of a boxing ring, it is not necessarily illegal, but you definitely shouldn't do it.
It's usually illegal.
I think it's usually illegal, but who knows what is popping off. So that's the concept of the magic circle. And I think it's a really good one to think about games with, but also at the same time, he doesn't mention that term a lot in that book. Like he mentions it once or twice, and that's the thing that he's mainly like attributed to, and also the like what play is as a definition. But there are also all these ways where that's actually a permeable like boundary. Like what happens if you're playing a board game with a person that always wins and you're kind of tired of that person winning, and so then you're just like, no, you know what, Peter can't win, I'm so tired of Peter winning, and then you're going to take your anger and frustration out in the game and then try and like make sure that Peter loses, and that becomes the entire game. And I wonder about the meaning of the magic circle then.
Right. What if you're playing a TTRPG, a tabletop role-playing game with somebody, but you didn't use safety tools first, and they go off on a direction that you're like, oh, I'm not comfortable here.
Right, exactly. But there is something around play which is all about consent, and it's all about negotiation of consent. And it's improv, right? In the same way that conversations are always improv, right? You never necessarily know what you're going to say, but you figure it out in real time. And the conversation goes where it needs to go based on the negotiation of two people. So play is happening, and play is something is happening there with play that is a little bit, I think, more interesting than the concept of the magic circle, but it's helpful.
The magic circle, I feel like I was thinking about it in terms of like why games are conducive to learning and what you said about you can fail in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a space where it's safe for you to mess up massively and it's not going to have a ton of consequence on your actual life unless
Totally.
you know, you're playing a TTRPG and you truly offend somebody.
Absolutely, right? Games are also really good at like giving people agency, right?
Yep.
Like in a game, you usually always have a role to play, actions that you can take, which is very different from the real world. I remember growing up and my mom was always like, watch Dr. Phil and how they always talk about the teens who lose themselves in these online games. And as a kid who played these online games like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 11, it was like, I feel like a lot of people miss the kind of social elements that happen in games, right? The fact that in a video game, you do have agency, you do have power, you do have control, and the ways in which you, through your own skill, can become a guild leader. And now that you are a guild leader, you're given respect. And so there's all this other social stuff that's happening in a game that a lot of people, if they don't know what to look for, can't necessarily see it. I love to like sometimes use Call of Duty as a punching bag example, but when you're playing these kind of first person shooters, these team-based sports, there's a lot of things that are happening there of like being able to quickly identify something in a distance, right? Being able to interact with these physics systems, being able to have your dexterity so high that you are able to shoot things really quickly and be able to communicate with your team members in rapid succession. There is something really interesting happening with games, but we have to look a little bit differently than the traditional education designers are thinking.
That's why the Army uses first-person shooters to train.
Don't get me started on that, but because that's a whole other problem.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely.
But like as we're saying, games are great for learning and they want people to learn certain things.
Right, because I think I think a lot of people think games will be a panacea to solve the world's problems, and it's just going to be it's nothing more than another tool.
It's a tool, yeah.
Right, it is a tool that has its pros, it has its cons, in the same way that you can communicate about certain problems in the world in a certain way, and all of a sudden it's educational, but on the other side it's propaganda, and it's all text, right? It's all image, it's all sound. And yet it's two sides of the same coin. And so nuance.
That feels like a place where the magic circle can actually be kind of problematic because you're inside of this space, and so you're not realizing that you're like absorbing all this text and information and sound, and you're not realizing the
Absolutely.
message that's being communicated to you in this space and whether you're like processing it consciously or unconsciously.
Absolutely. This is where a different form of literacy needs to happen,
Yeah.
right? Right. We talk about like media literacy. Like, this is a key point of understanding how media works will help you be able to determine or figure out ways that you can actually understand what a person or a group of people are trying to do
Yeah.
to you or for you, right? Thinking about, for instance, QAnon. QAnon is a really great example of what a kind of, let's say, an alternate reality game could look like if it goes very, very poorly, right?
I know somebody, Raquel's husband. Raquel is somebody that is Tegan's mom and somebody Ash and I are working with. But Raquel's husband works in alternate reality games, and he's been convincing me that QAnon is an ARG.
Absolutely. I think the only reason why it's not necessarily a game is because it is way too serious
Yeah,
in terms of the effects of it, but the way that it operates in most alternate reality games, most ARGs operate on the premise of a conspiracy, and that a group of people are like, this can't possibly be the case, and they come together, they go on forums, and they talk about the conspiracy. And then they do their own research. And then they come back and they are trying to push back against the conspiracy in some way or prove that the conspiracy is correct. But usually when it comes to these ARGs, it's about something that is so preposterous that whatever research you do can't even remotely harm anyone in the real world, right? Like the ARGs I work on, like Seed, the premise is the fact that some group of people at the University of Chicago have managed to come up with a time communication device. We can communicate to the future. And, we base it on the fact that the University of Chicago also hosted the Manhattan Project, right?
right.
So if projects around nuclear science can happen here, why not time and space travel? It's not so far fetched, but also at the same time, we can communicate to the future. That I don't know. That's a little crazy. But and if you want to like do your own research and try and find something, you're not going to find anything. Nothing at all, right? And you're only going to lead to speculation and people are just going to have fun. Also, we as game designers are making this super ridiculous such that it's about play at that point.
Well, that's interesting though, because what that chapter in On the Cusp of Digital Gameplay was talking about with Seed was how that resulted in a protest among
Oh,
your players
absolutely.
on campus.
It was so great.
Yeah. And y'all weren't expecting that, correct?
No, we were not expecting this at all. And this is why I like, again, when I think about all of these like systems in the real world and people talking for, protesting, writing, what have you, these are two parts of the same coin that a lot of the world systems that we see can also be viewed as games. And if we think of it that way, what can we do if we understand the material conditions and how those things are manipulated so that when people interact and do things that it kind of makes sense. So Seed, our students, it was again the premise, we the temporal archivist created this time communication device and they were working with this future corporation called Profile. And so the temporal archivists, were keeping this technology to themselves. We figured out that one of the students could potentially destroy the world, all speculation. And during that week of the game, the seed technology disappeared. And because it disappeared, the temporal archivist blamed one of their junior temporal archivists and held them captive. And our students were upset about that. No, our primary student population were Black and Hispanic students on the south and west sides of Chicago. So what that means is, in the junior temporal archivist who was held captive was a young Black man. We as designers knew exactly what we were doing. And our students were not having any of it. And we were like, oh, yes, we can't wait. So they immediately said, we need to protest for his rights. Like you can't just take someone captive and put someone in jail without a fair trial. Like, what is he being arrested on? How do you even know that he took to the device? Yada, 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 yada. And so the mentors told us, okay, so they're going to organize a protest. And we were like, oh, what does that
Cool.
mean?
Okay.
Cool. And then like we were, organizing for the next module, trying to figure out like, okay, this cryptography week, we have to have them solve some puzzles, teach them about cryptography. And then we look outside and there are 75 Black and brown students outside of our office with signs, with chants saying free Pell from that cell, because the character's name was Pell. And what we had to do in that moment was like, okay, we knew they were going to protest, but we didn't know that they were really going to protest like this. This is amazing. And so we had to have a whole conversation because we're like, they're doing the thing that we wanted them to do. That's fantastic. How do we design ourselves out of this conundrum?
Yeah.
Because like we now need to, like, the rest of the people in the building have no idea that we're running a program like this. Some people came down like, are they going to flip our car? And we're like, no, they're not going to flip your car. We know that for a fact, but we do need to figure something out because everyone else is like, what's the protest about?
What's happening? Yeah, yeah.
So we ended up doing the thing that we believed is the best course of action when a protest is happening, which is actually a dialogue, which wildly enough is kind of a radical idea.
Amazing.
Apparently.
Yeah.
So we did the thing that we thought would be the best course of action. We said, okay, we're going to send some temporal archivists. I was one of them that had to go and negotiate with the students. I was like, why me? They're like, because you're the director of the program. I'm like, oh, right. You're so right. I was like, leave me out of it. I don't want to deal with the design consequences of my choices. Like, I did this, but like, no. The students who, the rest of the students listen to the most, right? The most popular students, really. And then in the center of the street, we were having a conversation as to, okay, how can we move forward for this day? And that changed the entirety of the rest of the summer program because we then were like, okay, they want to have a longer conversation. They want to be able to talk in dialogue with the temporal archivist. They want to bring their points to the group. And so then we made up a story, which, on their part is real, but on our part, we were in that design room being like, okay, now we need a new narrative.
Let's scramble.
Let's scramble. Let's toss out what we're going to do that week and figure out something else. We told them this is a perfect time to have conversation because next week is when we have our annual temporal archivist meeting where we discuss important matters about what's going to happen with our technology and research. We would love to have you a part of this conversation. And that's what we did.
Wow. See, what I love, though, is because the way you started that chapter was 75 kids protesting on the street in front of a school building. But like what you did was find a narrative reason to de-escalate, but you also showed that treating people protesting power with respect and having dialogue with them works for de-escalation.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I love about working in games, because the things that I think people believe, which I do think are radical at the time, they feel a little less radical when they are in a game context.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are playing and at this point we were kind of testing the boundaries of what play meant because it was starting to get sort of serious, but also at the same time, it's a negotiation, it's a dance. Some people lead, some people follow. And this is that moment where it's kind of like, okay, let's go and do the thing that I think most people would think is radical. We could have just said, everyone go back to your rooms. Let's go and get to the next module. We could have done that. We could have shut it down. But I think, again, our philosophy, our mode of being of, oh, this is unexpected. I wonder what we could do with this. I wonder what direction this conversation could take us. I wonder how they're even conceptualizing what is happening here. And this is amazing and this is beautiful. And this is one reason why I love working with young people, because if you really actually listen to them and like really take the time to hear what they're talking about, again, they're really smart. They're really astute and can see a lot of things. They might not articulate it in the way that most adults would want to hear it, but also at the same time, they articulate it in the way that you need to hear it. And I'm like, this is great.
I actually have a question that's kind of around this. So, what I really like about your work and what I am kind of jealous of is that theory is integral to
Mm,
it, into building something practical. So, you essentially get to experiment with games as praxis
yes. Yes.
over and over again, which is so cool. And honestly, games as praxis is a really joyful kind of praxis. From the standpoint of you being like a designer of mechanics and interactions, how do you see games as being applicable to social movements?
Mhm.
And what would you like to see like organizers and activists and justice oriented people? What would you like to see them learn from game design?
I really appreciate the synthesis of like the things that I did. I'm like, oh, that's so. Oh, I'm gonna write that down. That's great. But I think for me, and I always feel like what I say is it feels weird for folks because like the way that I think about things, again, it's an embodied practice, right? Like everything I do in life feels like play and it feels like a game, even though again the stakes are high because for all I know, I only have one life and this is it after the end of that. But I wonder what it looks like. Like I love activists and the way that they embody their work, but sometimes I wonder what it would look like to have a critical lens and understanding the systems of oppression that we really interact in. And it means that, like, while we should be hopeful about making change, absolutely, that sometimes the change that we want to make is a bit harder than we initially imagine, and that we probably should take a critical lens and look at these systems and see how bad they are, and that we might actually need to do something a little bit different than what we have currently been doing, or that certain things have worked for us in the past, but they're not going to work for us in this day and age, right? I think a lot of people have seen Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, but they have not seen him talk about the fact that we have so much longer to go. If you watch this other interview of his, that he has a little bit of like he's become a little bit more reserved. And I think that's really powerful. So I say this to say I wonder if protests in the ways that we currently envision them, signs, chanting, we're out in the street. I'm not saying that they don't work, but I wonder if they work as effectively as they did in the 1960s, because maybe something has changed in our system with the proliferation of phones and the ability to see a lot of things and a lot of content at once, and the ability to also become desensitized to what you see really quickly. Or let's even say the fact that you might have a right to protest, you might have a right to free speech, but then all of a sudden you actually don't. If we think about, universities and the students having encampments, and then all of a sudden the students being pushed off of their campuses.
Straight up prosecuted, losing job opportunities, all that sort of thing.
Exactly, right? Which it then means that what we believe to be true is actually not true. And so to me, this means that the game has changed, but I do think we should probably take a little bit of time to figure out how the game has changed before we can then do our activist embodied thing of let's go protest. Yes, we should. We should put protest. We should push back. We should fight back. But we probably want to think about the best way forward now. I don't know what that is, but I wonder.
Hearing you say this, I'm thinking about if you sort of recontextualize the framework for how you're looking at things, because you mentioned like the proliferation of cell phones and the ways we become desensitized and the fact that like students are getting pushed off of campus and stuff like that, it's like the level design has changed.
Right. The level design has changed.
We have to figure out what are the new skills that we have to learn to be able to get through this level.
Right. Here's another example. At no point am I actually disagreeing with what the protests are. I just have questions. I wonder, as a game designer, do we really understand the game? For example, woke meant something when it first came out because it was primarily used in Black and Brown communities, talking about wake up to the oppression that is around you, wake up to fight for your rights, wake, like that's what it meant. It meant that you were awake, you were aware of the systemic oppression that was around you. That word has then been utilized, or say weaponized, to then mean that, quite frankly, I'm not sure how they're really using it, but it seems to be now a word to represent anything that conservatives don't like in relationship to race, gender, sexuality, anything. It's a way to push back against traditional conservative values.
Right.
Right?
Like they're doing the phrase DEI right now.
Right, exactly. Like DEI meant one thing, critical race theory meant one thing, and now it's has continuously been weaponized. So let's say this word has been taken, twisted, weaponized, and is being pushed and used against the people who have created said terminology. That is the game that has happened. Okay. So then let's say we have, and note this happened a little bit before woke, this kind of concept of it being weaponized happened a little bit before the entirety of the Black Lives Matter movement. But here we then have an interesting moment. We're seeing a number of Black bodies being shot and killed on social media. Note this has always been happening, but now we can all, as a society, see it. And now we are saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. This is true. However, two things. One, words are captured and then weaponized. That's the game. So now we have a phrase that can absolutely be captured and weaponized. And it happened, right? And now we're like, oh, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Okay, of course. And then people have to over explain what it actually means. But now we're using more language to describe what this thing is, when the whole game is that language is going to be used and weaponized against you. So adding more language to the game that is going to then come back and hurt you might not be the game that we want to play, is the first thing. Again, I support all of it. I was also out in the streets, but I'm just like, wait a minute. The second thing is then this other concept of like, well, right now we are continuously fighting for our humanity, right? And to say Black Lives Matter is also to say out loud that, hey, you all don't believe that we are human, and I'm here to tell you that we are human. And it's like, yes, but that also kind of seeds the ground that you understand what the other group is saying of like, we don't believe you're human at all. I just wonder, what does it look like to not actually play that game at all? I don't know. And I'm not even saying that I'm right. I am absolutely probably wrong. But me as a game designer, just kind of sitting here absorbing what's happening, I just think about these things. I just think about, what does it look like to move past language, if language is going to weaponize us, and or to also understand the premise of what it is that we're arguing for. I wonder what it looks like to actually embrace monstrosity. I just wonder. Like, I don't think of myself as a monster at all, but I think society thinks of myself as a monster. But I wonder what that would do for us. I don't know. Right. And so now that puts me in a weirder kind of space of, if I was to protest, and protesting is also its own form of praxis, and this is all a game. Now I need to understand, how do I disrupt the game, right? I need to disrupt the game. I don't want to play the game. I need to disrupt it in the ways that civil rights folks in the 60s, they were actively disrupting the game, right?
Yep.
They were doing things that would be classified at that point as illegal. Right now, I'm not actually advocating for illegal things, but I am pointing out the fact that what they were doing was illegal, and what we're doing right now is totally legal. And I wonder about that.
I don't feel like I have a place to necessarily say this with authority, but I think about this stuff in the same terms that you do. I've often thought about, like, yeah, the more you have to explain, the reason why conservatives win when they weaponize terms like that is because they're taking a short, succinct phrase that means something specific. They're changing the meaning, and it's the fact that it's short and succinct that is what like helps them convince people. So the more language you use to explain what the original meaning was, the less you're going to get people to even connect with it, and they're just going to take that short meaning. Thinking about this, what you're saying is like finding out what your level up is in this level.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we find whatever it is that's going to give us the bonus to, I don't know, speed or
Right.
whatever. So something video game stuff. But
absolutely, right. And that's exactly it. Knowing that in let's use a video game as an example, like you can't do everything that you want to do in a video game, but you can, and gamers do this all the time, find the boundaries in which the game designers never thought were possible and are breaking the games in really fun and interesting ways.
Look at the stuff people made in Tears of the Kingdom.
Oh my, not only were they doing very creative things, but also they were, I don't know, attempting to genocide the Koroks. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, there's that too.
But on either side, they were doing things that we never thought were like truly possible.
Wild stuff.
Within a game like Tears of the Kingdom. So I say this to be like, well, if we really want change, I think we're going to have to figure out the boundaries of the systems that are embedded in that world that have been designed to operate in this way. Or if you fall through the cracks, it's maybe sometimes not because the thing has been designed. It's what happens when you have overlapping systems and no one actually notices that. And so it's also a lack of design that allows for these things to happen. But to find those boundaries and to really think about that and then go for it.
This conversation is really interesting to me. But like I was sort of like noodling on what the framework is, because the podcast is about the business of creativity, how to balance making art with making a living. And that's not to say that that's not exactly what you're doing, but because you are in academia, that is, like you said, the weirder path. It's a narrower path that people who are working artists don't necessarily follow. But you are also thinking about all this stuff and training the next generation of game designers. And your work has been really interdisciplinary.
Yes.
So I want to know from your perspective, like from your high perch in the ivory tower, I would love to get your take on the games industry, your thoughts on where it stands now and where you think it is going and where it needs to go. And then what are like the potential future trends you see in games that you're seeing with the students coming through the program?
Yeah, it's interesting to be in this. I'm in the ivory tower. It's equally as chaotic here. I'm not gonna lie. Just differently so. We move much slower, but it is also still chaotic. I'll talk about my student population because I think UChicago students are a little bit different from other students who are going to like other schools for game design.
Well, like UCLA is a big one, right?
Right. UCLA, USC is a big one. Full Sail, DigiPen, Utah. So there are quite a few places that are focused on games. And I find that the students here are not really playing a lot of like what we'd say AAA games. They're playing a lot of like indie games. They're playing a lot of tabletop role playing games. They are truly like, again, I think I'm actually with my people when I say like they're the quiet nerds in the classrooms, or sometimes they're the theater kids who are doing the most in Dungeons and Dragons. They're the ones who are not the most talkative and out there, right? But they're super smart, right? The ones who are super talkative and like extra bubbly and charismatic, they go to Harvard.
Sure.
The kind of quieter, more life of the mind students who also have opinions on games, they come to UChicago. But the ones who don't want to do the whole, let's say, for lack of better phrase, vocational thing of I want to only learn how to do X, they're like, I really care about a liberal arts education and would maybe like to make art, but there's a high probability once I graduate, I might not make art. They come to UChicago. So that said, it means that the students that I tend to work with are really interested in asking kind of big questions and trying to then take those big questions and turn them into games, right? What does it mean to, like, if we think of apocalypse, and apocalypse means that it could actually represent your religion changing. So here's a game about the Vikings and what it means when Christianity comes in and takes over your pantheon. What does it mean to make a game that also intersects with wearable devices that you can try and like control with your mind? What does it mean to try and like mess around with your olfactory and use VR to then eat things and then imagine that you're eating different fruit, right? Like we're in that kind of space where people are just, I wonder if you can do this with interactive work, right? What does it mean to go into your community and actually think about how trauma is built in your community and then have people release that trauma using art, but also art that's culturally relevant to make these kind of Mexican tiles. And then what you're going to do is use projection map these tiles onto a well, which is the thing that you'd see in a lot of Mexican communities. What that means to me is that I think, and again, this is just my small view of what I see here, that we have a lot of students who are interested in actually going a little bit back to that kind of Renaissance man, the Renaissance person, the person who can not only make art and draw, but also reads a lot and thinks deeply about these questions and then embodies that and then tries to create a new experience from that. It means that instead of the proliferation of like these smaller individual people who are only able to do one task, it's like, what does it mean when you actually are in that boundary? And because you're in that boundary, you're able to see more. And now, because you're able to see more, you're actually able to produce new game experiences. And while I think the game industry, there have been a lot of layoffs, and I think that's very scary to a lot of new graduates.
Yeah.
But I also still, and I'm not sure why, but I still have a lot of hope for the industry because the types of games that are coming out are still new and kind of weird. These are the games that you never would have thought you would have seen years ago. Indie games have just gotten stranger and newer. You know, you have games like Outer Wilds, you have games like The Case of the Golden Idol, also Return of the Obra Dinn. As puzzle games, you also have things like Mouthwashing and Arctic Eggs and Rat Shaker. Like, you just have these games that are trying to push the boundaries in some way. And I think it's possible because students grew up with a lot of digital games and now they have a literacy that I think you're going to be able to see amazing and new things with.
That's cool. That's interesting to think about it that way because I'm thinking about what games I grew up with. And it was I came from a Nintendo family. So I only really saw, if we're speaking about video games, them being as like one kind of particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting to think that you have a bunch of young people who their entire gaming library is DLC essentially. And so that means, though, that if you can make something and then put it out there, it's almost the same as streaming. You can get a lot of content out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the financial investment in making games is still very big, but what you're describing to me is sort of what I'm seeing in my industry, in the film industry, where it's like, it's kind of collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
It got really top heavy and now it's sort of fallen apart. But like what I see as hopeful in this space is that we can potentially like decentralize the way that media is made. But it sounds like we can do it sort of in this interdisciplinary way, potentially, that I think is really actually very exciting.
Agreed, right? And like, you know, we have the rise of a number of different genres of games that have come out recently. If we still focus on like digital games, right? Like cozy games are like its own separate category now. We also have full motion video games. So games that you are watching videos within it and then making choices within it, right? Bandersnatch, I think, popularized it, but there are a number of Japanese games that kind of do this work. And so the thing that I like about games specifically is that it is capable of holding all of the industries that have come before it within it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want a interactive story, you can have a visual novel which kind of builds on top of books, right? You can have full motion video games. Immortality and Her Story are games that have videos in it, right? And so it's building off of the film industry. And then you have voice acting and theater. You can have that within the game, right? A game Inscription is a card game that also has like part escape room elements within it. And it's like, but also it's kind of part horror story.
Cool.
It's great. Animal Crossing just got everyone through the pandemic.
Yep.
Right? You know, with a lot of like community built around that. What I think is really exciting about games is actually exactly what you're saying, that you can kind of tell when the creators of a game kind of grew up. Sometimes, like, you can tell if some people didn't grow up with games and they're kind of doing something new, interesting, and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they grew up in like the late 80s, early 90s with the games, like the Nintendo games. This is why I suspect, and this is where I talk with no data, but this is just a gut reaction of this is where all the retro kind of side scroller games are coming from, because all of these folks grew up playing like, your Marios, your Sonics. And now if you start to look at games coming out on Steam, we have now entered into the retro PS1, PS2 era. So that means that all of the folks of my generation who grew up with the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and 64 with the very blocky pixel art,
Yep.
pixel like 3D models, are now like, I am going to make a game. And I'm like, yes, hello. I am of the age of the indie game dev. We're out here. And then 10 years from now, you will see probably like your Nintendo Wii U games kind of coming out in that style. And then we're going to get to a point where it becomes a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Can't wait.
What kind of advice are you giving the students in your program about how to survive like working in the industry while still creating the kind of work they want to make? And also like just straight up, if you're in touch with them, what are they doing after they graduate?
Again, we're the kind of school that's really good for the life of the mind. And our media arts and design program is getting folks to be more practice oriented, but it's not the culture of the university. So I tend to focus on telling my students like, wow, I love the fact that you're spending a lot of time talking about this, but it will only work in practice. You probably should make something. So I constantly go up to be like, can I play your game? Can I play your game? They're like, no, not yet. I'm like, okay, but why can't I play your game? It's been 2 days. Why can't I play your game? So I'm pushing a lot of like rapid prototyping, just try it, cut the paper out. It doesn't need to be perfect. You're spending too much time in Canva. Don't make it pretty, right? Because, we have a lot of great art students and I'm like, wow, your artwork is so beautiful. Too bad it doesn't really matter right now because you just need to kick something out.
Yeah.
So hyper focused on rapid prototyping, learning about sprints and that they should be doing things in like weeks or even days, and how they can think about using that just generally even in the rest of their classes, right? Like you're so stressed about a 10-page paper because you really want an A. Have you considered turning in the paper, getting a B, getting feedback on that paper, and then you know what to do for your final paper? I don't know. Like, iterate, man, iterate. It's fine. So that's what I tend to have my students focus on. I think I forgot the second part of your question.
The second part of my question, oh, me too. It was about what are your students, where are they going after they graduate?
Yeah. So a lot of our students, they kind of go all over. Some students end up in the game industry. So we have students I know at Riot. I just heard back from one student who is going to be working at a small kind of startup mobile game company. So they're kind of all over the place, which is good, right? Some end up going off and getting their masters because they want to do like more design work. So we have some students at USC, NYU, CMU, Carnegie Mellon, which is great. Note, we're a program that's only been around for about 4 years. So this is really kind of good for us.
That's dope. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have some students who go off and kind of do the more traditional focused jobs. Traditional in the sense that this is what they had planned to do in the first place, right? We have a lot of students who do econ, and then they do media arts and design because they are going to go off and work in Wall Street, but they also secretly always wanted to make art. And so they're like, okay, at some point I'm going to do my art thing. And it's like, you go.
Right.
Some students go off to law school, and then some students just go off and get a job. Some folks end up going into software. We've got some folks at Roblox.
Cool.
Yeah.
Having this conversation with you has been very clarifying for me about why it is that I like you so much. Because what you've been describing at the school and what's going on and why you're there in the first place is very much aligned with how I've been thinking that media needs to develop in the first place. And like the fact that is what you are training the next generation of whatever kind of media makers to do is, I think, really cool and inspiring and really different from the traditional path. So, Ashlyn, Sparrow, thank you so much for joining me. And I don't know, I'll talk to you soon.
I know. We'll chat in a moment.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Obligatory request that if you're enjoying the multitude of content here at Dancing Stickman, including not only Worldsbuilder, which has another 2 episodes in the tank, but also Oops All Witches, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. The final 3 episodes of Oops All Witches will be fully published by the end of 2025. I hereby declare it publicly. Please excuse me while I disappear into my dark little edit hole, because it turns out that sound designing a BBEG fight in Dungeons & Dragons is challenging. You can also listen to the published audio scenes from Broken Sky, which is, once again, the alternate reality game that Ash and I co-directed along with Jacob Lefton. That game actually has a bunch of unsolved puzzles that you can find at www.brokensky.blue alongside the episodes, some of which are actually puzzle clues that we ran Dungeons & Dragons and Wickedness for at the same time. Speaking of which, pick up a copy of Wickedness from Possum Creek Games. They're not sponsoring me or anything, it's just a fantastic game made by one of the designers of Oops All Witches Witch Class, Maisie Veselak, who also joined us for Broken Sky, along with 2 other Witch Class designers, Brandis Stoddard and Hannah Rose. And as I round the corner on the first year, or technically 9 months, of publishing my own content, all I can say about what's coming next is that this year taught me not to publish promises that I can't keep. But I have some really interesting projects lined up, including one that will hopefully not only be a published actual play, but will create a new kind of third space for creatives in the Bay Area. Most of the people listening to Dancing Stickman are from California, so if you're nearby and you want to get into actual play storytelling, hit me up, Sarah, S-A-R-A, @dancingstickman.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next year.